You're listening to Radio DePaul, Chicago's college connection.
Hello, Radio DePaul. This is Roxy. This is the first edition of the Soundtrack Revisited, my new show. I'm quite nervous, if you can't tell, but I think this is going to go pretty well. Today, I have a special show for you. The first soundtrack we're going to be talking about is The Brutalist. And The Brutalist is a movie that came out, I think, about a couple months ago. It came out in the US first in December, and then a more extended run in January. Famously won Best Actor at the Oscars and a few other things as well, but it also won Best Soundtrack, Best Composer, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So, the soundtrack was composed by this really cool, odd guy called Daniel Blumberg. He is a British artist. He is a musician, a composer, but also like a fine arts person. He draws a lot. He does different techniques like silver point, watercolor, graphite, things like that. But yeah, he's an all-around pretty cool person. He works a lot with the same people. He has done so many projects. He's been an active artist since his teen years, about 20 years now. And yeah, he's very active in this kind of improvising free jazz community that has its kind of headquarters in this place called Cafe Odo in London. He actually shouted it out when he won his Oscar, which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, sorry about that. I don't know if I'm on the air. Oh my gosh. This is awkward. I think I am. Let me just check, guys. I'm worried that I'm not on the air. I am on the air. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry, guys. This is what I was talking about. This is my first time doing this. I'm a little nervous. But anyways, so this guy, Daniel Blumberg, composed this score in about 16 months. So from January to April of the next year, which I think is interesting to note because I think we don't realize it when we, watch a movie, how long something like the music can take, especially given that this score is about, the music that he delivered ended up being about 100 minutes, though in the movie there are only about 80 minutes that were used. But yeah, that's 100 minutes of music and 16 months of work. And he worked mostly with musicians that are kind of in the improvising world that he's a part of as well. About 19 musicians in total are heard in the score of this movie. Just to name off a few that you might know if you're kind of tuned into this improvised music / free jazz world. There's John Tilbury on piano, Axel Derner on trumpet, Evan Parker on soprano sax, who's a free jazz kind of pioneer. Sophie Agnel, who's a French pianist who specialized in playing the strings on the piano. So the strings that are inside the piano, she plays those. And then Joel Greb, who's a bassist. Simon Seeger, who plays sax on this, but who is also a pianist. Anyways, a lot of really cool people. So 19 people in total. And in receiving his Oscar, he not only shouted out Cafe Odo, which I mentioned earlier, which is kind of his creative headquarter. He shouted out all these musicians saying, "The sounds that you hear on The Brutalist are made by a group of hardworking, radical musicians who've been making uncompromising music for many years. I'm accepting this award on behalf of them," which I think is awesome to, shout out the people who, helped you make this amazing score, which you'll hear shortly. Another cool thing about this score is that about 90% of it was recorded on a very small, very simple setup, very cool nonetheless, which was just a pair of Sonosax recorders, which had a total of 16 channels. So this is the radio, so I can't show you what it looks like, but it's very small, and you'd be surprised, that an entire score was recorded thanks to that. But its size and its, simplicity is what helped him, travel around Europe and the world to record all these different musicians and make this amazing score. So I think that's really cool to see that, you can use fairly simple fairly simple equipment to make something that sounds this big. So the first song I want to play for you guys is not the first song that we hear in the movie, which that one is also called an overture. This one I'm going to play is called Overture, parentheses, Bus. So this one plays during the credits of the movie. Really amazing scene where we're kind of being put in the position of someone who's like in the front seat of this bus that the main character is taking to head towards Pennsylvania. So yeah, I just realizing now I didn't give you like a synopsis of this movie. I just wrongly assumed that everybody knew the story of this movie. But yeah, this is a movie about a Holocaust survivor who emigrates to the United States. He first arrives in New York with this famous scene of him, emerging from the bottom of the boat and seeing the Statue of Liberty upside down, and kind of that being the sign that like I've reached freedom, which I think is interesting. So that has the first piece of music, the first cue as we call it in soundtracking. But I chose to play you the second one that plays, I believe, which is called Overture Bus. Yeah, I'll just play it for you guys and we'll talk about it a bit more afterwards. All right, so that was Overture, parentheses, Bus. And so as I said, this plays during the credits, so you can only imagine how really cool that theater experience was. I thought it was one of the best musical moments of the movie. It really, brings you into it. So yeah, I chose to play this one first, not only because it is an overture, which means literally an opening to the movie, and it introduces kind of the main musical theme or motif of the entire score, which we're going to hear again in this original score a few times, which is the da 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 da. Just that very simple thing is the theme of the entire score. So the motif, I should say. It's very simple, but incredibly effective in just having a cohesiveness to the entire score, which is something that we see a lot in soundtracks and seems kind of obvious, but it's actually, when you find a good motif like that is versatile and can work in many different kind of styles of music or different kinds of cues for your movie, it's amazing. So I think this one is great too, because it's very evocative of kind of the character's journey, this going up, da, 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 and then going back down. Dun. There's something about it. Maybe I'm over analyzing, but I think it's interesting that it goes up and then down, you know, and that's kind of the character's journey as well. He has this great kind of rises from the ashes, finds success in his work, and then, you know, he gets caught up and somewhat goes back down. So yeah, again, maybe I'm over analyzing, but I think it is interesting. So yeah, this song that I just played introduces that theme. And then it also uses a specific instrument that the composer created for this score, which is something called a prepared piano, something that famous composer named John Cage is known for. It basically means that you're using a regular piano and adding objects, elements inside the piano, so by the strings, to kind of change its sound or use it in kind of an unconventional way. And it creates kind of strange noises that we can't really identify. And this song, especially at the end, kind of uses that. But many other songs and many other musical cues in this movie reuse that again. But yeah, I think it's interesting that this composer really infused his love and his practice of experimental music into kind of the actual instruments he was using for this movie. And I think it's also really fitting that he kind of built an instrument or built onto an instrument when, again, the movie is about an architect, about someone who builds and who creates things. So yeah, I think there are a lot of parallels between these two artists, the composer and the architect. We'll come back to that because I think the composer was really aware of that when he composed. So yeah, this is not one of them, but some of the overture pieces, namely the one I mentioned that's on the boat when the character arrives to New York, the music was played live as they were shooting. So I have to say a demo of the music, because it wasn't, you know, the final piece, but a demo of the music was played as they were recording, as they were shooting, which is not unheard of, but I think is interesting. And the composer does talk about it in this interview that I've sourced a lot of my facts from, this interview he did with Dolby. And he talks about how it really seemed to help the actors, namely Adrian Brody, but also the extras and the cinematographer, to kind of move with the music. And then in turn, once, you know, they had finished shooting and it was time to record the final piece, so go from a demo to a final piece that would then get mixed and mastered, they were able to play with the image. So there was this kind of like symbiotic relationship between picture and music. And I think that really shows in the final product. You can see that there's something that just, it fits so well into each other. So yeah, I think that's interesting to note for this overture. Again, that's not the piece I played for you, but it is kind of in the same like exposition part of the movie. The next song I'm going to play for you guys is a song called Pennsylvania. I keep saying song, I should say cue. The next cue I'm going to play for you is called Pennsylvania. The character, after going to New York, moves to Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia, and I just really like this song. I think, again, it uses the little motif I told you about, the da-da-da-da, but it adds more of that piano, and, you know, it's just a variation of something that we might have already heard in the overture that I played. But I really like this one. I think it's very evocative of the initial optimism and excitement this character feels and that we feel in this story. So yeah, I'm gonna play next song called Pennsylvania. love that one. You probably heard it. There's in a lot of these songs you can hear the musicians playing. Like you can hear some like human noises, like either their foot is going down or like the instrument is being like touched in a certain way. And I really like that about this score. It's not afraid to show that, and we'll mention it again later, but it actually tries to do that intentionally. And again, I think it relates to this idea that it wants to show the artistic process in the way that the movie shows the artistic process of this architect, Laszlo Tut. So yeah, I think this song I just played for you is a nice kind of resume, or like I don't know, I can't find my words, but it shows a lot of the things that I was trying to talk about earlier. And I think there's also this thing of a contrast between kind of soft, exciting piano with the strings and everything, and then come in like the percussions and I think it's a bass that like boom, boom, and it's like, it's more threatening, you know, and it brings in this idea that like, okay, this is exciting and this is a journey, but this is also very intense and potentially dangerous. And yeah, that's what this movie is about. It's about, you know, being somewhat caught up in your excitement and in your journey, and it catching up to you. So yeah, the next song I want to play and the next kind of sequence I want to talk about is this section, this sequence where the main character goes to a jazz club. So you got to imagine it's the late 1940s. I believe at this point he is, I can't remember if he's in, yeah, I think he's in Philadelphia by then. Yeah, definitely. And he goes to a jazz club. He's had a pretty rough day, I believe, and he's somewhat inebriated, and he will get even more inebriated in the jazz club. But this is a moment where Daniel Blumberg, the composer, was able to really let his fellow musicians, improvisers shine. Because this is, you know, a jazz, I believe it's a quartet, if I'm not wrong. The musicians are Antonin Gerbal, who's a French drummer, Joel Grip, who I mentioned, who's a Swedish bassist on double bass, Simon Seeger, who's on piano. Simon Seeger is notably part of the Art Ensemble of Chicago, a pretty iconic free jazz band that's been around since the 60s in Chicago. And then Pierre Bourrel is on alto sax. So yeah, it is a quartet. And yeah, Daniel Blumberg said about this sequence that it does a lot of things. It has a lot of functions. So firstly, it is, you know, supporting the character's journey. At this point, he's kind of spiraling, or he's starting to spiral. And so this kind of free jazz moment is pretty adequate. And then, you know, excuse me, I'm getting distracted because I'm trying to figure out the equipment at the same time as I'm talking. Anyways, this sequence also evokes the period. You know, it's the late 40s. Jazz is definitely booming at that point. And yeah, so it's both a historical accuracy thing, but also an emotional journey thing. It definitely comes at the right time in the movie, and it's a great sequence. The cinematography is also incredible in this moment. I believe this is a sequence where the cinematographer was actually operating on a smaller camera, you know, for those purposes exactly, so that he could be, you know, handheld, kind of roaming around the jazz club. And yeah, it's a very interesting sequence. So yeah, this next cue, called literally Jazz Club, is one where, as I said, Daniel Blumberg was really able to let his fellow musicians shine as improvisers, and you can definitely tell that that's their specialty, or at least one of their specialties. So yeah, this is Jazz Club. That was Jazz Club. So, yeah, I think this, again, the progression of this song, of this cue, is really reflective of the progression of the movie and of the characters. It starts as kind of what the composer himself called like more straight jazz, you know, something that most of us have already heard before and are familiar with and are comfortable with. And as the song goes, it just goes into this delirium, ending in something completely, you know, abstract, which is amazing, which I love and which I think really works with this movie and with this sequence in particular, which, interestingly, I think is also the mark of a great cue, of a great song in a soundtrack, is that it reflects the sequence that it's in, but also the movie. And I think that's really powerful and that's really smart. So we're already kind of at halfway through the show, which is crazy. But yeah, so we're going to go to a quick ad break. You're listening to Radio DePaul, Chicago's College Connection, and we will be back shortly.
Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Jeremiah.
What's up? This is Steve-O from Jackass. You're listening to Radio DePaul.
Radio DePaul.
Radio DePaul is Chicago's College Connection.
Looking for flowers for a special event, celebration, or that special someone? Come check out the freshest and most unique floral arrangements in Chicago at Bunches Flowers. We're not just a neighborhood flower shop. We deliver citywide and source daily from around the globe, including Holland, Central and South America, California, and even Australia. Discover our unique plants, dried lavender bouquets, candles, and gifts. Use code STARTERPLANT in the spring for a free orchid with any purchase. Come experience exceptional flowers and gifts at Bunches.
Rock the Clock is brought to you by listeners like you. Thank you. To donate to the Children's Miracle Network Hospital, please go to radiodepaul.com/rocktheclock.
Why did you wear that?
You shouldn't have drank that much.
What a whore. Are you sure that's what happened? Nobody deserves to be assaulted. And it's definitely not their fault.
1 in 5 college-age women will experience some sort of sexual assault or relationship abuse.
And it's not just women.
It affects an entire community. As many as 53% of college-age students have experienced at least one incident of dating violence.
If a survivor tells you that they have been sexually assaulted, don't brush it off.
Listen to them.
Believe them.
Advocate for them.
If you know of a survivor, have witnessed sexual assault, are a supporter, or are simply seeking to gain more information and be a part of the conversation, contact the Office of Health Promotion and Wellness at 773-325-7129 or call the 24-hour Chicago Rape Crisis Hotline at 1-888-293-2080.
You're listening to Radio DePaul.
You are listening to Radio DePaul, Chicago's College Connection. Welcome back to the Soundtrack Revisited. I am Roxy, your host for today. This is our first edition. So right before the break, we were talking about a song called Jazz Club that's in the movie The Brutalist. We're talking about The Brutalist today, composer Daniel Blumberg. Woo! So moving on to another part of the movie where our main character, played by Adrian Brody, starts building this huge kind of cultural center / church for this rich guy named Van Buren, who has this huge estate near Philadelphia. And he's building, he's sketching, he's, going through the process of designing this huge, massive center. And part of his process is to roam around the estate and kind of see what's around and start visualizing it. And the musical cue for this sequence, or for one of these sequences, is called Bicycle, because he's riding on his bike around the estate. And it's played by this amazing British pianist called John Tilbury. But yeah, Daniel Blumberg, the composer, raves about him and raves about working with him, recording in John Tilbury's studio, which is in like a sort of veranda / glass extension of his home in England. And yeah, Daniel Blumberg came with his small setup, which just consisted of that Sonos Sax 16-channel battery-operated recorder that I spoke to you about, and just set up a few mics. So I think he said like 2 in the room, 2 on the piano, and then 1 on John Tilbury. So if you listen closely, I'm not sure if it happens in this song, but at least in the intermission song, which, yes, The Brutalist has an intermission, which I think is very cool, and which was great for me, seeing this pretty long movie. But yeah, so this next song is called Bicycle, and I love it. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's pretty simple. It's just some piano, but it's amazing. So yeah, this next cue is called Bicycle. That was Bicycle. I'm sure you heard it, but yeah, we can hear John Tilbury like moving, and I think at some point like he drops something, which I love. I love that. In classical pieces too, you can hear that sometimes, especially with piano players. You'll hear them like breathing or something, and I love that. It refers back to what I was talking about with this idea that this is a movie about an artist, about an architect, about a creator, and the soundtrack wants to mimic that. And Daniel Blumberg, the composer, actually mentions that when he talks about this piece, and he talks about John Tilbury, the pianist who plays, that he wanted us to feel the presence of an artist, just like we feel it in the movie. And I think it works. He did a great job with that, simply by setting up a mic on the musician, which, something as simple as that, if you don't think of it, it might not have this specific quality. So yeah, I love this piece. It's more mellow, and it's a nice break from the intensity of the movie and the intensity of other cues, which are, songs in this movie. really quickly, before I keep talking about this score, I want to shout out everybody who's listening to me back home in Paris, or in England, in Manchester, in Cambridge, and in Ireland. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. This is kind of a dream come true for me to be on the radio. I'm a huge podcast and radio listener. The first thing I listened to on one of my first phones when I was a kid was the radio. I had this like tiny little quote unquote smartphone, which was basically a brick. And I would listen to the radio in my middle school courtyard. Anyways, so it's very cool to be on the radio myself now, about 10 years later. So, yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. Next song I want to talk about, and next kind of sequence I want to talk about, this part in the movie that is probably my favorite. The protagonist, so Laszlo Tupp, played by Adrian Brody, goes to Carrara in Italy, where they have the marble, the famous Carrara marble. And so they go to these mountains where the marble is sourced, and it's absolutely gorgeous. You know, raw marble just carved from the inside of a mountain. The cinematography is just incredible, filmed on, at least part of this sequence is filmed on VistaVision, on film. And it's absolutely gorgeous. And to score part of this is another cue that is fittingly called Carrara, where Daniel Blumberg employed a specific technique where you kind of want to get the reverb of a specific place to then apply to your music that you're going to be recording later. And to do that, it's a pretty interesting process. You have to shoot a gun in the space to get that resonance back. And it basically what it does is it takes it creates the enough like reverb for you to take it into your software later on, cut out the gunshot and just keep the resonance or the reverb, and then apply that on top of whatever instrument you're going to be recording later on, which I think is great and interesting. Just the process of it, of having to go in person in the place where in the place you want to illustrate musically. So yeah, that's something that Daniel Blumberg did. He went to Carrara himself to record this reverb, and then for the music, a lot of this is played by Evan Parker, which I mentioned. He's a saxophonist, and so they recorded Evan Parker in Kent, which is where he lives in England, and then applied this reverb that Daniel Blumberg had recorded in Carrara. Little geeky fact: he recorded it with ship's microphones, which are kind of famous for being really good at being very truthful to the sound. So yeah, some fancy microphones set up in the middle of a marble, I don't know what the word for this is, but in the middle of the mountain with marble carved out of it. So yeah, this is a cue called Carrara, played by Evan Parker on, I believe, soprano sax. And his technique and his way of playing sax is very unique to him, and this is why Daniel Blumberg picked him. And yeah, you'll hear what I'm talking about when I say unique. So yeah, this is Carrara. so that is Carrara. Carrara is in Italy, by the way. I'm told that that is not a given. So Carrara is this famous place in Italy where if you have a bunch of money and you need marble, you go there to get it. So yeah, and they do have a bunch of money in the movie. Well, or so it seems. Yeah, I forgot to say at the beginning of this episode, but obviously this is not really a spoiler-free zone. I mean, I'm not trying to spoil any main plot points, but, you know, if you haven't seen The Brutalist, maybe go see it if you have time. It is a long movie. I mean, it's not in the movies anymore, but, I mean, at the theater anymore, but I think it's worth seeing. It's very interesting. Next song I'm going to play also plays during this Carrera sequence, and it's not an original song. It's a song that they borrowed, but I just love this song. It plays during a scene where they're having, like, a party, kind of a little dance party in the marble. God, I'm, like, blanking on the word of... Is it a quarry? Is that the word? It might be the word. Inside the quarry. And yeah, they're having a little dance party. And this is a song called You Are My Destiny by Mina. You might know this song. It's a great song. Great song to dance to. So yeah, this is You Are My Destiny.
You are my destiny. You are what you are to me. You are my happiness. That's what you are. You are my sweet romance. You share my loneliness. You're more than life to me. That's what you are. Heaven and heaven alone can take your love from me. But I'd be fool to ever leave you, dear, and a fool I never be. You are my destiny. You share my reverie. You're more than life to me. That's what you are. Heaven and heaven alone can take your love from me. But I'd be fool to ever leave you, dear, and a fool I never be. You are my destiny. You share my reverie. You're more than life to me. That's what you are.
That was You Are My Destiny by Mina. Yeah, so that's a song that plays in that same Carrera sequence when they're dancing. And I think it's interesting again. You Are My Destiny. Who is Laszlo Tut's destiny? I don't know. I don't want to spoil, but something pretty intense happens in this sequence as well. And I think it's interesting that this kind of fun, loving song plays right before it. Very contrasted. So yeah, we're going to skip to the end of the movie, which happens a couple decades later. I think it happens around the 80s. Laszlo Tut's work is being honored in Venice, and again, to signify the kind of historical slash, have some accuracy in terms of the sound, Daniel Blumberg was very intentional about this, and introduced synths and electronic sounds to this last cue, that's the last original cue of the movie, which is called Epilogue, parentheses, Venice. And to do this, he got the help of a certain Vince Clarke. Vince Clarke, if you are into kind of synth pop music from the 80s in Britain, you probably know this guy. He's responsible for writing music for bands like Depeche Mode and Yazoo. So he's a pretty important guy when it comes to that genre. And so yeah, Daniel Blumberg contacted him and they worked together on making this final cue for the movie. And Daniel Blumberg notably used something that is called a Moog synthesizer that was created in the 60s and that is very evocative of that time period all the way to the 80s. So he used that. He used, obviously, the help of Vince Clarke, who he went to visit in New York to record this. And this song, just to paint you a picture, is one of the last cues that they also recorded and wrote for the movie. And Daniel Blumberg talks about, hanging out in his apartment in London with the director. God, why am I blanking on his name? Brady Corbett. They hung out together, finishing up the song, he says, with 2 bottles of wine, dancing in my apartment. So you'll see why with this song. It is definitely a very danceable song. And you can hear, the electronic instruments coming in and taking over once, our story emerges into the 80s. So yeah, this is Epilogue, parentheses, Venice. Yeah, that was Epilogue, parentheses, Venice. Yeah, that's the last original song in the movie, but as the last song we're going to play on this show, I'm going to play you the last song that actually plays in the movie, which goes into the credits, the final credits, which is not an original song. It's a song called One for You, One for Me. I love this song. I've been jamming to it a lot. But yeah, before I leave you to that, I want to say thank you so much for listening to this first episode. You're listening to Radio DePaul, Chicago's College Connection. I'm your host, Roxy, on the Soundtrack Revisited. I can't wait to yap some more about soundtracks in the future. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. This is One for You, One for Me.
You're listening to Radio DePaul, Chicago's College Connection.